alongside that, Tracie is also an entrepreneur. She has her own website, All Digitocracy, which has been running for a while now, which is still, she's busy looking after that whilst also working full-time at Stanford. She has a background in journalism, starting in the sales and circulation, and then on the writing side. She holds a law degree from Georgetown, has worked on the Hill, has a very strong interest in media policy issues, and has lots of interesting things to say about diversity and reaching underrepresented audiences, which is something I think we're all really interested in. So, without any further ado, over to Tracie.
Thank you. So I'm going to go through my presentation really quickly because I want to spend some time on questions that you might have about diversity and using more inclusive language and framing and narrative. And I want that to be more of a conversation because I'm looking to learn as much as I'm more than I want to talk. You know, I want it to be a two-way conversation. So I'll give you a quick overview about what I've been doing at Stanford. You can ask me questions about that too. So I focused on how we can put data to better use in terms of growing audiences and reaching new users. And I defined new users as people who've been long ignored by mainstream media and who are now choosing to ignore the media themselves, and then people who would never even think about us, and those are millennials. So I found myself sitting in a statistics class taught by Chris Wiggins, the chief data scientist of the New York Times. And I said to myself, God, has journalism come to this? And yes, it has. Journalists are being asked more and more to be responsible for growing their own audiences to help benefit the greater the overall company in terms of growing audiences. So when students ask me whether they would need to know how to write algebraic formulas, equations, no, you won't need to know that. Breathe a sigh of relief. But you will have to understand how this kind of math is the basis for algorithms designed to help us grow audience. So you'll have to understand how to do this yourself, how to grow audience, not the math itself. But you will have to understand the underlying basis and meaning of it. Data is about more than studying clicks. And right now our industry is focused on clicks and traffic. But that doesn't tell us very much about our user. And in order for us to grow audience, we need to know who our users are. One of the challenges facing the industry right now is that we're so hyper-focused on trying to understand our existing users that we're not even thinking about the potential users. We're not thinking about the people who've ignored us, really. Not that we thought about them in the past. But we are really interested in millennials. But we don't have time to really understand their behavior right now because we're so focused on trying to figure out how not to lose what we already have. But I want in ways in which we can improve that is, again, studying behavior, engaging people in conversation is really important. So I got a question yesterday about, well, do we really have to respond to people in comments? I would say yes. I would say have a dialogue. You don't want to be nasty, but you want to engage them because when you engage people, you actually learn more. It might lead you to another story. It might lead you to additional information for the story you've written. It could be very, very enlightening, but not just engaging people in conversation in the comment section on websites. How about going outside the newsroom and engaging people in conversation? One of the things that I did when I was a beat reporter is I walked my beat. I attended community events on my beat. I went to churches on my beat. I talked to people who lived in the communities, in the neighborhoods on my beat. And I think that is missing from journalism today. In fact, it goes into what we'll talk about later in terms of narrative and why journalists are guilty as a whole, really, of repeating what people in power tell them and not checking it by going out into the streets, into the community, and seeing it and finding out for themselves what's really going on. So we can talk about more of that, Well, you see what I did there with the cat and the clicks? It was, okay, just make sure you got it. How many people in here know the story about Zola? There's a quick raise of hands. That's interesting. This is good. This is an interesting room. Okay, so I was thinking some of the younger folks would know the story about Zola. Last fall, there was a woman on Twitter who, in a series of tweets, told the story about her adventure of going to another city to do some exotic dancing that turned out to be, actually, she left town with a guy who was going to pimp her out. So she tweeted this whole story, and it just enraptured the attention, and that's a keyword, attention of everybody. Ava DuVernay started following this woman on Twitter. Missy Elliott retweeted her. People were talking about it. It really went viral. The Washington Post saw this. Really smart people at the Washington Post saw this, and they said, "Wow, what's going on?" Now, initially, the Post did do one of those clickbait stories about this is what happened on Twitter today, but the Post went further, and they actually talked to the woman to find out how much of this was true. They actually looked at court records to see if the guy had actually been arrested, which he had been. So they found out a lot of the story was true, and they wrote it. Guess what? She was actually telling the truth, because that's one of the things people were asking about on Twitter. Is this real? And it happened. It actually happened. So they went beyond. They actually talked to people. They actually did some reporting. Believe that. Some reporting. And they were able to capture the attention of hundreds of thousands of users who came to their site for the very first time. The very first time. And that's the basis for how they are now trying to build audience. Of course, the Washington Post is backed by Amazon now, so they have a lot of technology to help them. But they started first by just really engaging with people on social media. So I know that you have a guest coming next month who's going to talk about platforms. So I won't go too deep into that. But here are some of the places where you can find communities of diverse voices talking about stuff and stories that don't appear in mainstream media. So I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with this, all of these tools here, right? Do you all know what Kik is? So these are places where I think Twitter, for example, we all know about Black Twitter. We know about Tumblr, but do you know that there's a huge community of Muslims who go to Tumblr? I did a panel last year, Beyond Black Twitter, about where you can find some of these really interesting conversations from voices that are typically not heard or seen in our regular reporting of the day. So these are some of the tools. But I want us to talk specifically about what the Washington Post is doing, because they are coming closest to really personalizing news and content for its users. They're figuring out not only how to serve their existing users, but also how to grow by targeting potential new users. And that's what we have to do. We have to do both of those in order for us to be successful. The Washington Post has developed its own software, and it's proprietary software for right now. Bandito is one tool that they've used data to develop, and Bandito actually optimizes content for clicks, so to get more clicks coming in. But then they take it a step further, and they use another tool called Riveting, which say a new user comes to the site, and before that user leaves, they ask that user, hey, would you read this other story? And it could be a story that the Post wrote or published, or it could be a story that somebody else published. And then they have Clavis, which is based on Amazon's recommendation system, which comes closest to recommending stories that's similar to what that user, they believe that user is interested in. Now, what do you think that they're doing with all of these tools? collecting data. And why? Because they want to build their own user profiles of these users. Something Facebook already has, something Snapchat already has, but they're not sharing the data with the news organizations. So the Post is using these tools to elicit a little bit information from the user so they can start forming their own, drawing their own picture of that user and creating a profile of that user. They assign a unique ID number to that user. So the next time that user comes back to the site, at any time, they know exactly who you are. And so then they see what you're reading next, what the second story is or the third story is, and they begin to form this picture. And they use that information to get you to come back or to entice you with a riveting to show you another piece of content that'll make you stay longer so they can learn more. The longer you stay, the more they learn about you. So that is something that's called personalization, and it's something that every publisher wants to do, but the Washington Post has figured out a way to do it. They're not 100% there yet, but they're pretty close. And think about it. Think about how Amazon works. You go to Amazon, you're looking for a product, then you click off of Amazon, you go to another website, and what do you see? You see an ad for a product, the same thing that you were looking for. Well, that's all the Post is doing. They're adapting that kind of technology to news content, and I think it's fascinating. But I spent all this time looking at technology, but the conclusion that I arrived at is you can have all the bling you want, all the data, all the technology, all the tools, but if your content still doesn't represent the users and their interests or their passions, then it amounts to nothing, really. It's great to have the data, but you have to do something with it in order to get the payoff. So that is my presentation. That's what I've been working on at Stanford this year. And I hope it all made sense to you. But if not, ask me questions.
I have a question about Washington Post has a paywall basically, or you have to you only see 10 articles for free a month, and so what do they do then if somebody is clicking and is interested but doesn't want to pay? What do they do?
So they have this information about you, and
right.
So they're going to use that to target you in the future. Next time you come to the site,
right.
They're going to use that information to get you. Really, all they need you to do is to register.
Right.
And once you register, then it's all about making sure that user returns. Because once you return, you're more likely to register. Then you're more likely to subscribe, and you're more likely to click on an ad, which they really want you to do on the site. But I'm glad you brought that up because the New York Times is using data a little bit differently. Chris Wiggins he's developed an algorithm that says, hey, this person is at risk of canceling, or he also uses data to actually optimize single copy sales. So making sure enough papers go to a certain area, they won't run out, so they can sell them. So he is looking at that kind of predictive analytics.
Right, because that's you would worry that they would come and get excited and then maybe get turned off.
Well, as long as you register, registration is free.
Right.
And they're using incentives to get you to register. So hey, if you register for the site, here, take this. They're partnering with existing brands to really to give you something in exchange for sharing a little bit of information with them. Mm-hmm. And that's what we really want, because that's what we sell advertisers. So. Mm-hmm.
Tying into what you were talking a little bit earlier about diversity and trying to create content that may not exist in other places, do you think that the algorithms can sometimes be damaging in terms of getting people in a niche of like, you like this type of article, continually feeding them that type of article and not branching out to other things? I'm thinking specifically right now in terms of the election that's happening and people who may have certain political beliefs that are just being kind of funneled in like-minded ways because of the algorithms.
Yeah. So this question came up this morning. It's a good question. It's about silos. We tend to talk to people who think like we do We read content that we're already in agreement with. And won't this just worsen that problem? Well, I say we're already there. But I think that there are ways you can use this technology and you can use it responsibly. So the example I gave this morning is like, hey, I might consume some content about what's happening to Palestinians in the Middle East right now. And that has to do with human rights. So the next time I come to the site, I might click on something to do with police brutality in Chicago. And that too has something to do with human rights. So it's not exactly a silo. These umbrellas are kind of broad. I mean, we're already putting people in buckets in terms of their age and gender and geography. Why not put people in buckets based on their interests? That's more relevant to us. That's all I'm saying. So the interests can be broad enough where we're not continuing to, silo people.
Tracie, how easy was it to get tech or media companies to talk to you openly about how they're doing this stuff? Because a lot of this stuff is proprietary, it's experimental. They're going to be very, I imagine, quite private about what these processes are. They're not very open necessarily about what's being captured and how it's being used to inform our user experience. So that would be my perception. Is that what you found in this?
I'm still playing tug of war with Facebook right now. To hey, let me in. I want to know. I want to see the data that you share with publishers from Instant Articles, and everybody knows what Instant Articles is. So Facebook has partnered with some major news organizations to feature their content in such a way that, and you can help me a little bit with this, but they like, for example, the Washington Post, and this, you're going to receive these articles in your news feed, and the Post wants you to see their content, but it's mostly major brands, I think.
Yeah, so they opened it up originally to like a dozen brands as a pilot. You remember how it changed that if you saw a story on your feed, previously if you clicked on it, it would take you out of Facebook and it would open in your browser, Safari or Chrome or Firefox. And then towards the end of last year, they introduced it so it basically takes you to another page within Facebook, and then you go back to your timeline. So the aim is you never basically need to leave Facebook. For Facebook, obviously, that's great because they're getting all of this fantastic content people want to read and they're not leaving
for
the
free.
site for free. And for publishers, the incentive was Facebook is where your audience is. So, a lot of cases, if you're not in people's feed, people are not coming to you. And they agreed a 70-30 revenue split. So if Facebook sells ads that go around a Washington Post story, Facebook keeps 70% of that money. The Washington Post gets 30%, unless the Post sells it themselves, in which case they keep 100. But more often than not, actually, they're absolving a lot of that kind of ad sale direct to Facebook, and Facebook are doing the work for them.
Right. So I'm trying to get data around Instant Articles, and we haven't gotten there yet, but I'm still trying. So what I hope to do is to do a case study. To look at, so actually being a part of this and putting the data, launching some experiments with the data to try to grow audience and see how that works out. Because yes, news organizations are not very forthcoming with the numbers, and they don't want to look bad. We know, and I understand why it is. I mean, this goes to the very heart of their business and how they make money, how they sell to advertisers. And so they're not real willing to share that information. So, but I think with the case study, I'll be able to get to some of that. So I know that people have questions about diversity and inclusive language and framing, and we can talk about that too.
I think the title we gave the talk was about how to reach underrepresented communities. So data is clearly one way.
And social media is the other.
Social media is the other. What other avenues can publishers use, and can you give us some examples of people who are doing it well?
we talked this morning about how the Center for Investigative Reporting, it's in San Francisco, is producing investigative reporting on some really, really substantive topics, public housing and deaths on oil rig accidents, and how veterans are being taken advantage of by these proprietary educational institutions. And so they really wanted to try to reach the people that they were writing about. And so they started adapting their reporting to stage plays or to spoken word, pop-up magazines. And so that was a new way for them to reach a new audience. Because those people are not necessarily going to go, well, first of all, to the Center of Investigative Reporting's website. Who knows who they are, right? So they do partner with other news organizations to feature their content, but still you're going after kind of people who are already taking the paper or read the paper or read the website. You're still not reaching those folks, those new users that I talked about earlier. So these are ways that they are now experimenting to reach out to folks who wouldn't ever interact with their content. And I think it's really fascinating. I went to see one of the plays. It was really, really cool because one of the guys who died on the oil rig, his mom was there to see the play. So it was very, very emotional. And they hire script writers. The San Francisco Chronicle did this too. They produced this huge package about gentrification in the Mission District of San Francisco. And they didn't use the term gentrification, but that's what it was all about. And they hired script writers to write for the documentary that they produced. And so that was really, really interesting. We talked with their editors about how they made this project. And so they talked about that. And so if you're majoring in film or cinema studies, I mean, I think there's a real future for you out there because video is where it's at right now, and people are really interested in not just how to edit video, but how do you tell a story better using video.
I know we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but I'm really curious in how changing your story frame engages audiences differently, and what have you found about how just changing that frame, from we're just here to report about the bad stuff to maybe a more inclusive representation of the community, how that impacts audiences or readers' engagement with the media?
So the Zola story that I shared with you, that wasn't necessarily it wasn't a great story in terms of the kinds of information it conveyed. It was a very traumatic and fraught story for most of us. I think we're reading a fraught story, but I think the fact that that Post actually went out and talked to the people that they were writing about instead of just simply writing about them from some pedestal somewhere. They actually talked with them and included their voices in the story. That's that's actually like innovative to newsrooms today for some reason. It's right. It is baffling, but we've become, I guess, reporters nowadays have so little time because they're being asked to shoot video and they're being asked to turn over 5, 6, 7, 8 stories in a day. They're being asked to rewrite and make a podcast, produce a podcast. They don't have a whole lot of time, but what I tell students is to push back a little bit against your editor. I think some of the best reporters push back, and they know how to push back a little bit against editors, and take that time they need to go out in the community and make sure they're talking to people, and that those people's voices and concerns are actually reflected in the coverage. The reason why you see a Black Lives Matter right now is because people have gotten so tired of seeing themselves being written about in a way that's inaccurate in most news stories. When you saw Michael Brown, the photos that they used of him initially, instead of his cap and gown photo, they used the photos that made him look quite frankly, like a criminal. And so then Black Lives Matter came out with this whole tweet hashtag, if I were killed, these are the pictures. This is how I am in my everyday life.
Right.
Portray people the way they are in their everyday lives. I talked about earlier about Freddie Gray in a CNN piece that came out about Freddie Gray after he'd been killed, and this is during the trial of one of the police officers that was charged with his murder. CNN described Freddie Gray as the son of an illiterate heroin addict. Why describe him that way? This man is dead. He can't say for sure whether his mom is a heroin addict or not. Why describe him that way, especially when the story wasn't even about him? The story was supposed to be about the cop who was on trial. That's what I mean by reframing the narrative. I mean, that was in the lead. So we have to figure out how we tell the whole story and not just part of it. We were talking earlier this morning about another unarmed black man who was killed in New York in a dark stairwell. The police officer that shot him, it was by mistake, he said. But really, I think it had a lot to do with training. But that's opinionating. So let me go back. So the unarmed black man was killed in a stairwell in New York. And the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal came out with a story about the killing. But they used the guy who was killed, they used his mugshot. Now, we know he was arrested, but do we know that he was convicted? We don't. But we've criminalized him, given people a reason to think that there was a reason why he died. That was of his fault, that it was of his doing that he was killed. Just by using that mugshot. So All Digitocracy did a story questioning why did the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post choose those photos to tell this story. And they did take the photos down, but by then it was too late. The damage is already done. Ultimately, the police officer did go on trial for killing this man. I can't think of his name right now, but he was Asian American. One of the first police officers to actually be held accountable is another person of color. All of these other police officers who are white, who have killed unarmed black men, or black people, because there have been a few women too, have not been held accountable. There's not even a trial. It doesn't even get out of the grand jury. But this one of an Asian American police officer does go to trial, and he's convicted. And we didn't even bother, and when I say we, I mean journalists, we didn't even bother to cover that story about the tension between blacks and Asians or surrounding that story. So here we go again, falling down on the job. And all this does is foster resentment among our users, the people we want, the people we need to come to our sites so that we can survive. It just fosters a resentment, and it alienates those people. And that's the opposite of what we should be doing. So that's what I talk about when I mention reframing narrative.
I think something that is unfortunate that is happening right now as we try and unpack a lot of these issues and try and bring that to light in terms of this is why Black Lives Matter is important. This is why it's Black Lives Matter and not All Lives Matter. And this is why we need to question these things. Is a lot of the commentary that I've seen on the very conservative right side is, well, now everybody needs to feel special. Like there's this backlash against people who are transgender, people of color, people who are trying to bring these issues to light. There's this backlash against that's almost rooted in no, you're not a special snowflake, and it's really sad to see that happen. How would you advise to respond to that commentary? Or trying to overcome, those users who feel obligated to disingenuate diversity issues?
I'm not really interested in trying to convince somebody that it should be Black Lives Matter, because if we are having that conversation, then you're probably not somebody I want to talk to anyway. But I will say before I leave, we don't see on the same scale young white men being killed at the rate that we see young black men. And I do understand that this is a really complicated, complex issue. But until that person can acknowledge that these incidents are happening at the same rate or at the same level, I mean, there are no similarities. I think there are valid issues. The other thing I would say is, for all this time, the majority has had the majority has had the stage. They've had the platform. They've had the room. They still do. But this, for the first time, because of the digital era, these other voices are rising up. They're finally being heard. That wasn't happening before. And quite frankly, what you're seeing when you hear the argument you raised, is a reaction to these voices being heard for the first time. So, I prefer that I'm talking to someone who's open-minded. I can do that. I can talk with someone. I can engage with someone that's more open-minded about these issues. But if you've already decided that I just want to be treated special, no, we just want. I mean, there wants to be, equity, equality, not anyone asking to be treated special. So I think that is my response to it. And if you're open to have that kind of conversation, then we can have that. But if not, then I would prefer not to waste my time. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I had a question about like the riveting software. I think that's what it's called.
Riveting?
Right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So how does that stand up to like attention spans of generations, which seems to be getting smaller and smaller as we go down generations?
I know. So right before you click off, riveting pops up and it says, "Hey, before you leave, would you read this story?" And all you have to do is click yes or no. It takes a second. The user isn't made to feel like they are having to, spend too much time responding to this. And you can either go. It's just a summary of the story, small, quick bite, yes or no, and you can either read the story or not.
Yeah. And if you read that one and then you leave, does it hit you with another article?
I don't think so. I don't think they want to. Yeah, I don't think they want to. Give you a reason to leave, and they're just giving somebody a reason to leave. They want you to come back. So if you talk to publishers now, it's all about experience. So they want you to have a really positive experience now with their sites. Now that's not to say that all websites give you a positive. I mean, advanced newspapers websites are awful. Well, I'm on tape right now. Ooh. But I'll be honest, they're terrible. So their websites are awful, and those are not great experiences for people. But for the people who are really on the cutting edge of this stuff, yeah, it's about user experience for them now.
Okay, so one of the aims of this speaker series is to get into people who might challenge some of our preconceptions in terms of some of the work we're doing in class or some of the ways in which we are teaching subjects across the faculty. Based on the 24 hours that you've been here, what are you going to go back to Stanford with in terms of a takeaway of things that you think we're doing well and things you would like to see us doing that perhaps we are not?
Well, I think I'm very impressed by the fact that you're asking the questions and how we can do better. That's fantastic to me, because a lot of newsrooms are not having this conversation. One of the things you brought up that I really am interested in is if you develop a course around data analytics in audience and different ways to reach audience. I think that's really important. I don't know that I've impressed upon the students in the room today how important it's going to be for them to know who their audiences are, because they will be responsible for them, even whether you are attached to a news organization or not. And chances are, a lot of you won't be. You'll be independent journalists. And so you have to build your brand, and you have to, the only way to build brand is by building your audience. and knowing who they are and having a personal relationship with them. So the fact that you're asking the questions and that you're thinking about these things is really interesting to me. I would love to see an execution on that. I would come back and see a play about some of the environmental issues that Native American communities faced in Oregon and Washington State. I would love to see a spoken word series about one of the students I spoke with this morning was talking about how difficult it is for her to be on this campus as a black woman. People don't understand what it's like to be in her shoes, even though she's forcing herself to be in yours, and it's very difficult for her. I would love to see a spoken word series on what it's like to be a black student on this campus, reported and then vocalized, and produced for a podcast. I think that would be fascinating. Yes, sir.
Tracie, I have a question regarding the data analytics, and we spoke yesterday, and I told you I'm somewhat interested in WhatsApp, and I don't know if you know. Well, it's not secret anymore. It's the second most used app now, as close to about 1 billion users. But most of the users happen to reside in the developing world. I'm sure my research tells me a lot about because of it's cheap. It's cheaper to use compared to other ones. But over here in America, I don't know if you've come into contact with any numbers. Why are Americans not using it? And if Americans who use it are mostly, based on what I read, are immigrants, who are from different parts of the world. And so I was trying to figure out if you happen to know what the dynamics are, and news organizations also using it, because I believe it could be a very good platform where you could share content freely, if really you want to reach as many audiences as possible. So if you happen to know anything about those numbers, that would be nice.
You're right. We don't use it. It's not as popular here. I use it because I use it to communicate with my international friends and fellows. That's how we talk. We use WhatsApp. But I think because people here are so used to using their phones, the messaging systems in their phones, and then you have Facebook sucking the internet, and so they have a messaging system as well. It makes it really easy to communicate. You have Slack, so you have these other apps, in other words, that people use for messaging services. And so WhatsApp I guess we came into WhatsApp late, or WhatsApp came to us late. We had already had other products. What I think people need, the news organizations in particular, what they need to look for is Kick. Because Kick has all of these apps inside of it. And I remember, you guys are probably too young for this, but I remember AOL chat rooms. And so you could share video and memes and all that stuff in the AOL chat rooms. And Kick is AOL chat room to me. And so I think even Reddit is included in this, in Kick. Reddit is an app, and then also you can hook up using Kick, or actually try to date. They have a flirting app or whatever in Kick. So all of those, you don't ever have to leave Kick. And so I think if I'm a publisher, I'm probably going to look at. I'm going to look a little bit closer at Kick after when Snapchat starts to kind of wane. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, one of the challenges for WhatsApp and publishers is that it doesn't have a publishing platform, so you have to manually add users, and then that's capped, I think, at 50 per broadcast group. So it's not really, they don't have a publishing platform, and they don't care about that. They're not interested in that. Whereas if you contrast that with Viber or Line, like for example, the BBC has over 1 million people following it online, even though that's an app that's really popular in Southeast Asia. Or WeChat would be another app, very similar to the model that Tracie just described, where you can do everything.
Yeah.
You can watch video, you can date, you can order food, you can order a cab, you can transfer money to your friends, all within, it's like one app to rule them all. And I think that's a
And it's huge in China.
yeah.
It's really, a friend of mine showed it to me, and you can like order manicures to come to your house using WeChat. It's cool. It's very cool.
Great. Well, I think that's all we have time for today, but thank you very much all for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Tracy said at the beginning, we have someone coming to talk to us about Snapchat later on this month. So on the 20th of May, I think we're in this same room from 12 to 1 that day. Yvonne Liu is going to be speaking. Yvonne is a former Stanford Fellow, which is how she knows Tracy, but she's also the Snapchat editor for Vox. So if you know Vox Media and some of their different products, she leads up their team producing the content for Snapchat, which is seen by millions of people every day. It's only up for 24 hours and then it disappears, gone forever. And she's going to talk about the process of how they choose stories, how they tell those stories through Snapchat Discover. I think that would be fascinating to see, to get that insight. And particularly when you consider that a year ago, Snapchat Discover didn't even exist. So this is a job, and she leads a team of people who a year ago weren't even doing what they do now, which just shows you how quickly our industry is changing. And many of you probably already are Snapchat Discover consumers, so actually getting a chance to sort of peek behind the curtain and see how it works.
It's all about audience.
Yeah.
All about audience. So the last thing I want to say before you guys leave is you may graduate from here thinking you're going to do one thing, and it turned out to be totally different. When I graduated from college, I thought I was going into a newsroom. I went into circulation and advertising. Yvonne is now heading Snapchat. So just know, be open-minded, because you never know what's going to happen.
And she's 27 years old, and she started off as a video journalist at the Seattle Times. So she's already had a number of different changes within her career, and she's only a few years older than you guys. She's a great person for you. Anyway, thank you all for coming, and thank you again.
Thank you.